Everybody, and welcome in. We're excited to have you join us today. We'll get started in just a minute as folks continue to log in. As a quick reminder, we like to keep these webinars conversational, so feel free to engage with the chat throughout the session, and we'll address questions as they come up throughout the webinar.
And I'll go ahead and say hello in the chat too, so you guys can all see where that is, but it should be on the right-hand side of your screen.
Yes.
And I'm also going to apologize in advance to everyone in the audience. My children are both home today with the flu, so they're downstairs, but that doesn't always mean anything.
Life happens.
Yeah.
Our Massachusetts has school vacation week this week, so we've got a little bit of a change to our schedule as well.
Yeah, love the school breaks.
All right. Did we want to get started?
Yeah, let's go.
Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley McAlpin. I'm the head of marketing here at Rockerbox. I've been at Rockerbox for the last 3 years, which means I've spent the last 3 years kind of knee deep in this future of measurement and understanding why brands do what they do when it comes to measurement. And I'm especially excited to talk about kind of moving beyond last click, because I think this is something that, though most marketers agree we need to be kind of getting away from, we're still seeing come up with a lot of like finance teams and things like that. So I'm excited to have this conversation with Courtney.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Bittelari. I'm the director of analytics at Engen. Really excited to be here today. Excited to have a Q&A session with Ashley. I'm also looking forward to kind of unpacking the last click stuff and how to move forward. I've been an analyst for my entire career. So I'm, coming from the space of last click was the thing, and now it's kind of not the thing. So it's been a really interesting journey to be a part of, and I have a lot to say about it. So I'm looking forward to discussing that today.
Awesome. Okay. Our first question is, how has the shift from last click attribution to a more comprehensive approach changed the way brands evaluate marketing success? Courtney, did you want to?
Sure. Great segue from my introduction. This shift from last click to like a more holistic measurement has been a game changer for a lot of brands. And I think it's pushed a lot of brands to a new place. And maybe that new place is a little bit uncomfortable. So things aren't any longer just about like who gets credit for the conversion. We know that. It's more about understanding the entire journey and the role that all these different channels play over time. So things like the awareness channels, mid-funnel, and then your closers, which are going to show up the strongest in last click. So I've seen brands start to recognize this. They recognize the value of upper funnel. They recognize the value of mid-funnel. They recognize that it doesn't immediately convert, but it does play that huge role. I think what's been tough for people is, how do we know what that value is? So moving beyond last click definitely helps people make better budget decisions, especially like when they don't realize how much channels like social or video even contribute, even if GA or other platforms don't show it. So I see a lot of brands acknowledging this, but I do see some people struggling to act or move forward. They know they have to, but they sometimes don't know where to start. So I kind of guide people to like a practical approach for like, we layer some things. We can layer in incrementality testing. Definitely MMM can help us here to get a clear picture of like what's actually driving growth instead of relying on like one flawed data point like last click. I do want to say like super early in this webinar that it is very easy to villainize last click attribution, but I don't think it's a dirty word. It's just kind of an incomplete view of what's going on. So it's still a really useful directional signal for like lower funnel things, paid search affiliate. If a customer clicks on it goes to your brand and searches for your brand and clicks on an ad, that's still valuable. I see the issue when last click is used as the only measurement approach, and then you're seeing your upper funnel channels get beat up, kind of ignoring what drove that customer in the first place. So we have a lot of brands at New Engen that use MMM quarterly or biannually to kind of plan their spend and based on like incremental ROAS, and then using it in parallel with incremental testing and last click. So it's less of like one thing, and it's becoming this sort of menagerie of many things to figure out like what's really going on and what decisions we can make from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it's interesting that you talked about like we shouldn't villainize last click. I do think that's true, and I think it is easy to villainize it, is particularly because it's been held as this source of truth. And I think for marketers, a lot of marketers have been held to last click by maybe other stakeholders in their companies, and so it becomes this like we know that like the last interaction is not the most important interaction all the time, like. It just was the last interaction. So I think that's a really good point to call out. I also think channel complexity plays a huge role here too. Like we've seen channel complexity and like channel mixes have changed dramatically over the last 5 years. A lot of like the social selling and like things like that, where there's a lot more going on than there was. And so I think for a long time, like last click attribution was the default because it was really simple and it was readily available. And like it was, though I don't think anybody's arguing that there wasn't complexity in advertising before, it was a little bit simpler to like kind of connect the pieces. But I think like saying all of that, last click is obviously incredibly flawed. It gives 100% of the credit to the final touch point. Like that's what last click means. And it ignores a lot of what you were talking about, the brand building, the demand generation, everything that happened earlier in the customer journey. And I think it ultimately led a lot of brands to overinvest in lower funnel tactics at the expense of long-term growth.
Yep, agree.
We could definitely dive into, but I think that now brands are moving into this like more nuanced view. They're moving beyond just looking at last touch, and instead they're embracing things like multi-touch attribution and MMM, like you were talking about, or incrementality testing. And this shift is really like crucial because it allows marketers to measure and optimize and really do that across the full funnel, understanding not what's driving immediate conversions, but also what's fueling their like sustainable business growth. And I think we'll probably get to that a little bit later in the conversation, but like measurement is no longer just about marketing understanding what's working. It's about like the business understanding what's working. And I think like brands are asking now, like they used to be asking what drove the sale. And now they're asking like, what's the real driver of performance over time? Where should I invest next? And like brands that maybe like formerly relied solely on last click might now be blending MTA with granular insights with MMM. And then they're like layering on incrementality testing. And they're really starting to take this like really holistic, unified view to their measurement, which is going to lead to and is leading to smarter investments, business decisions, and things like that.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's, GA was such a familiar, last click, particularly in GA for e-com clients, was like a really familiar place. And it's kind of, it's a little uneasy to move beyond that. But I do think people, like you said, are recognizing, okay, it is a funnel. We have to feed the top of that funnel, but like, how much do we allocate? You know, how hard are they working for us? And that is a really complicated question. And I think over time, people have gotten a lot better at answering that or having the tools ready to be able to answer those questions.
100%.
All right, I think that leads nicely into our next question, which is how do multi-touch attribution, marketing mix modeling, and incrementality testing each contribute unique insights to measurement strategies? Ashley, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think like in order to answer this question, and this could be like a whole, like we've done webinars actually where this was like the whole topic. So I'm going to try to stay brief. Courtney and I were joking about monologues earlier. I'm not perform a monologue right now. But I think it's really important to like first understand like the unique value of each methodology. We have an approach to this called unified measurement. We actually launched a playbook at the end of last year. If you're interested in kind of like the Rockerbox kind of conceptual view of this, I would encourage you to go download that deliverable and like take a read. It'll talk about each of these layers. But I think like the value of each methodology is like really where we should start. And like, so we have multi-touch attribution, deduplicated attribution. It's great for understanding like how touch points are contributing to conversions at a really granular level. This is going to be like where you find your real-time or close to real-time insights, and it helps marketers specifically optimize their spend across all the channels. And then you have marketing mix modeling, which like MMM is going to be a little bit broader. It's a historical view. It's going to be looking at aggregated data over time and assess how different marketing channels are driving sales. It's important to note that like MMM is usually going to use like months, if not years. Like we prefer like 2 years of data to have like a solid model. And I think that's important to call out, right? Because you can launch MTA by just connecting to all of your systems and like start measuring immediately. Your MMM is not going to be super helpful to you if it doesn't have that historical data. And so that's going to be like assessing that over time and looking at your channels that drive sales, which include like digital and offline and external factors like seasonality. There's economic trends that you can build into your MMM. Like MMM is really just like a high level overview of the performance that includes like your business insights as well. And it's great for strategic budget allocation, but it really isn't built for day-to-day optimizations. Like if you're using MMM to make like daily changes to your, like, that's probably a different conversation too. I'll let Courtney address that, but it's just like not what it's built for. And then you have incrementality testing, which like is really important. It's the only way to actually like show causality. Testing acts as kind of like the truth set. It validates what's truly driving your performance. You can use lift studies or geo experiments or holdout tests to like measure that causal impact of a channel or campaign. And like, while it's a really great ground truth, it is not really scalable for measuring every marketing touch point continuously, right? You have to set up a test, you have to run a test, and it's really just like a moment in time versus kind of these other methodologies, which is why I think it's really important to like have all of them because they're all answering different questions. But I do think there's like a challenge in combining the methodologies. And it kind of comes down to like 3 core challenges. Like you have your data fragmentation, you have this like the different time horizons, like I was talking about, and then you also have like complexity in execution. And so each of the approaches that they all rely on different data sets. Like MTA is going to be using user level tracking, MMM is going to be using that aggregated data, and testing is going to be relying on experimental design. And so bringing them together requires you to have like really clean, centralized data, which is why like the data foundation is so important and something that we talk about at Rockerbox all of the time. Like if you don't have that data foundation, like it's really difficult to run any of these methodologies. And then like the different time horizons, MTA is going to be near real time, MMM is going to look back months and years, and then test is going to be a specific time frame. That's definitely a challenge. And then you have the complexity in execution. Like many brands struggle, I think, to integrate these approaches because they require technical expertise across and alignment across different teams, which can be a challenge for different brands. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to like blend them together and like building a more holistic measurement strategy, making stronger investment decisions, and ultimately like future proofing, which is such like a buzz term. I hate to use it, but like it really does. Like leveraging multiple methodologies really ensures that you're not tied to just one data set in the event that that data set becomes more complex to access. So
yeah.
My monologue.
I agree. I'm with you. I'm right there with you. I think it kind of MTA, MMM, and incrementality testing kind of depend on who you are and what you're trying to do, right? Mm-hmm. So like Ashley said, MTA, user paths, it's great for digital heavy campaigns and maybe some cross-device stuff, but it can sometimes be a little trickier since we're losing, some information with privacy, like we're losing some signals. So that's like something like to be mindful of. MMM, Ashley nailed it, big picture trends across all channels, including your offline ones, that it does lack that user level detail. So you're not going to have that there. MMM's not real time. If you're doing MMM on a daily basis, I would like to personally hear from you. Just because I just would love to know what you're doing. So yeah, MMM, like we're talking quarterly, biannual stuff. I have seen, some brands do it monthly. But those monthly refreshes are really just to optimize the budget going forward. They're not like these massive MMMs that show like all these things. They're just the budget optimizer side of it. But yeah, it's a forward-looking tool based on a lot of history. So like if you don't have the richness in your data going back, then your MMM's probably not going to be all that accurate. So that's like another thing to be mindful of, is that accurate historical data really does need to be there. And I think a lot of people forget that. There's no select star from perfect table at a lot of companies. And that's just the reality of that. And then the last thing is, testing provides what's working by that cause and effect. So I think Ashley also alluded to this too. Testing requires like careful test design. You have to really nail your groups, right? If they're not comparable, then you might skew the results. You have to make sure you're not testing things in parallel that might overlap. You're going to not get an accurate result there. the goal for testing is making sure you have an actionable answer. There's no such thing as a failed test. We're trying to test a hypothesis, right? We're trying to prove it or nullify it. So sometimes when the test says, oh, it didn't, okay, that's still a learning. So I'd like for people to also still remember that too. I think one of the biggest challenges here is when these don't align. So you did an MMM and you saw something pop really high for an incremental return or something that was unexpected, and you've done some testing that says otherwise. So like maybe MMM says double down on social, but MTA is underestimating its value because it doesn't show that like long-term impact. So triangulating that, trying to get them across, tactical and strategic insights, I recommend having your MMM guide your testing plan. So whatever pops really high there for an incremental opportunity, like that should be your prioritized roadmap for testing. I like to guide brands towards that way. And I think just the reality is like, there's no single thing, there's no single model, last click, MTA, MMM. It's never going to tell you the whole story. Like you do have to use all of them.
Yeah. I also think it's really interesting. So like, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that we have tried to do, especially like more recently, is like push brands towards providing us with like their test results, or if Rockerbox is running their incrementality test, and then leveraging those as priors for their MMM, so that we're kind of like reinforming each of these models. And then there's like this whole concept of like validation and calibration, where we're using those to actually like adjust the MTA model, which is a whole nother conversation as well. But I do think it's really like, that's a really important key, is that like, these shouldn't necessarily be used in silos.
Right.
Like these methodologies should be informing each other. And if you're stuck in a system where they're not informing each other and they're just like constantly in conflict, like that's just creating actually more headache.
More defense, more conversations. You're just kind of like running in this circle. I definitely agree. I love when clients provide me with their prior tests, because then I can incorporate that into the MMM without having to ask, right? If they say, no, Snapchat does whatever for us, I can go in and adjust the model accordingly, and then it incorporates that. So super important call out, always share, always share your test results.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. And our next question is, what are the most critical considerations when establishing unified KPIs that align with both short-term campaign goals and long-term business objectives? Courtney, do you want to take this one?
I would love to take this one. I have a lot to say about this area. I've been in analytics for my entire career. Like I said, this is an area that I feel very strongly about. So KPIs only work if everyone is actually aligned on what they mean. I have seen so many teams waste so much time debating what ROAS means, because finance, marketing, and analytics each define what revenue is, right? So if you're an e-com brand, is it net sales? Is it gross sales? Is it sales before or after your returns? Is fraud removed or not? I've been in a lot of discrepancy conversations about these numbers, when come to find out, it's, finance was looking at net sales, the C-suite's looking at gross, and then, we just have to have a lot of alignment conversation. So there's a lot of, I think, discussion here that has to happen. So like clarity, make sure everyone speaks the same language, have those meetings, have the conversations, understand the data sources, try to work towards making sure everyone's looking at and using the same source of truth. If I'm using table A for my dashboards, someone else is using table B, let's pause. Why? Right? Like that happens a lot. And I think it leads to a lot of conflict and discomfort in trusting the numbers when they're not necessarily inherently wrong. They're just like thinking about the business in a different way. So these conversations are really critical. The second area, thinking about KPIs, is relevance, right? Tie your KPIs to your real business outcomes. Don't just use vanity metrics. So like when I say vanity metrics, I mean things like click-through rate. Click-through rate's great for understanding engagement, but it's not going to necessarily correlate with conversions or revenue. If you have a high click-through rate, that might look really impressive, but if those clicks aren't leading to sales or valuable like customer behavior, then that's not really going to tell you what success is. Bounce rate's another one. That's a misleading KPI unless there's context there. Like, blogs might naturally have high bounce rates. So I think the relevance of your KPI needs to make sure like that's tied to a real business outcome. The third thing is, I think, balance. You should be looking at short-term and long-term things too, like CPA and long-term growth would be like more like LTV. So
Mhm.
getting alignment is tough. Those conversations can be spicy sometimes, but those cross-functional sessions is where each one talks to their priorities and sources and trade-offs. Those can really go a long way. I recommend, if you're someone like me or you're in these conversations, document it, socialize it, create a hub of information. That's like super important. I think a lot of people forget to do that. And then you can ground people in that space. Where's your measurement plan? That should say all of these things. And then you can constantly point people back to that. So people have that psychological safety to say like, okay, when I know I see revenue in this result, I know what this means and everyone's comfortable. As analysts, I feel like we are the ones that need to be the champions and evangelize those sources of truth. Wasting time repeatedly defending discrepancies, it takes away like from meaningful projects and being able to answer business questions. If I'm spending 60% of my day every day defending a number, then I'm not using my brain to do cool stuff. So I would so much rather do cool stuff. So I really recommend having those tough conversations, making sure the KPIs make sense and documenting it. It's such an underrated step. And I just feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said. And I think like one of the areas that I think about when I think about this question and like, what are some of like the critical considerations is that I think a lot of people kind of fall into this, I think one of the biggest challenges, I guess I'll start there, in marketing measurement is actually balancing the need for short-term performance optimization with long-term business growth, especially for marketers, right? Because they're constantly being pressed for this like optimize right now, optimize right now, optimize right now, but they're also being held accountable to the long-term business growth. And so I think that like if teams focus only on immediate wins, like Courtney was talking about with like ROAS or CPA, then they risk like missing the bigger picture. But on the flip side, if they only track those long-term health, like brand metrics, they're going to struggle with their real-time optimization. So it's kind of like the key is to define, like Courtney was talking about, this KPI framework that's going to integrate both and then get alignment across teams on like what that framework is and what each of those metrics are being reported on for. So I think like some key considerations would be like aligning your KPIs with your business goals. Like every single KPI that you track should directly ladder up to an overall business objective, like period. If it doesn't, like, what are you tracking? Like, what are you tracking it for? And that can be as granular as traffic, like Courtney was saying. It just like that has to have there has to be a purpose for that. Like, what is the reason that you're tracking that as a metric for your team? And then if a company's priority is like profitability, then like your margin or your customer lifetime value should play a really central role in like how you're developing these KPIs. If your focus is like brand expansion, then measuring your new customer acquisition and your market penetration is going to be key. I think that like one of the mistakes that a lot of companies make is choosing KPIs that optimize it for their marketing efficiency in isolation. When like really you have to be thinking about your larger business impact. And then I think kind of second to that is like segmenting KPIs by the funnel stage, which I think Courtney, you kind of alluded to too. Like short-term metrics that we talked about, like CAC and ROAS, like conversion rates, they're really critical for lower funnel optimization, but the upper funnel efforts like brand awareness, engagement need to be measured with metrics like share of voice or aided recall or first touch conversion. Like these are things you should be looking at and understanding. And I think that like unified measurement means essentially like structuring KPIs to reflect the different roles in the customer journey. And I think like the second part of that question is like, how do we ensure alignment across departments, which I think Courtney, like you did a great job kind of speaking to that and like advocating for your metrics, that you're not spending all of your time sitting there like fighting for something or like defining something over and over again. And I think from my perspective, like the best piece of advice is just like do that early and often. Like make sure that there's like core alignment across the team on like, these are the things we track and this is why. Like we track this for this, that for that. And as long as everyone is aligned at the top level, they're not going to be coming back to you and asking for all of these other things because you've already explained like why you're tracking and like looking at each KPI in each different area of the funnel. So, but I think your advice was great there, Courtney.
We did get a question in the chat. They asked, how can I know the business data I have can go with MMM?
I can take a stab at that. When I work with clients, I ask for daily data by your spend, so daily spend by channel and tactic. I like to know what are we investing in, and then I ask for daily revenue aggregated, right? Because what we're trying to prove out is what are the biggest drivers of revenue. So what are the biggest predictors? Like what channels are, pulling their weight the most? Because we're not getting that with last click, right? So if CTV has a huge impact, what is that modeled impact that CTV has? So it really is that daily level. You can do weekly, but I would like to double down on what Ashley said earlier. Like the more data you have, the better to get to that point. I do think it's a little easier for brands to come up with spend data. Sometimes, not every platform was deployed at the same time. You might have not been running Snapchat for 3 years, and that's okay. I always encourage brands to just give me what they have, and then I will make a judgment call on what to include in the model. And, there's some, general kind of guidelines and rules to follow when you're establishing an MMM. Like if you don't have 52 weeks of solid spend data, you might not want to include that in your model until you do. So there's, some judgment calls that you need to make when you're establishing these, but that is generally kind of the 30,000 foot view of the data that we typically request. Ashley, do you have a take on that from the Rockerbox side?
No, I totally agree. Like I said, we our kind of general party line is 2 years of data. But I think it's really important for people to understand why that is. And that goes back to what MMM is used for. And it really it's a regression analysis. It's a historical view. If you don't have, if you're basing that on just a very small amount of data, it's not going to be accurate. That's not 1 or 2 weeks or months or whatever is not going to be an accurate depiction of what the performance might have been over years. And so you run the risk of having a model that's grossly inaccurate to your business and then making decisions off that model. Yeah, sure, somebody could build you a model, but if it's not right, you're going to make decisions based on bad data, and then you're going to have to answer for those. And so that's kind of why we go back to exactly what Courtney said. We'll look at all of the channels that you have, all of the data that you have, and then decide okay, this is what makes sense to be included here. And here's what doesn't make sense. And then we also, like I said, incorporate priors and things like that. So if there's things about your business and maybe you don't have the data to support them, we can build those into your model.
Okay, great. Our next question is, with customer journeys spanning multiple touch points, how can marketers identify the true drivers of performance across channels? What role do technology and analytics platforms play in simplifying this complexity? Ashley, did you want to take that one?
I can. So first, the challenge of multi-channel complexity, the consumer buying journey is not linear today. A consumer might see a TikTok ad, they might engage a meta campaign, they might search on Google, they might visit a website, they're going to be retargeted on CTV, and then they might convert after an email reminder, or they might drive by a billboard and convert, heaven forbid. With so many touch points, the real challenge isn't just tracking them, it's understanding which of those channels and tactics are truly driving performance versus those that are just kind of along for the ride. Because if you're touching a consumer in 12 different ways, you need to understand which of those 12 are actually really important, which I think is where some testing comes into play here too, because you can actually hold out and say okay, we're actually not going to run, CTV. I'm going to pick on CTV. I'm not saying you shouldn't run CTV, but we're not run CTV in this region to see if it's actually impacting our overall conversions, or if it was just kind of part of this really complex strategy and channel strategy that we have. But I think the second part of that is the role of the technology and analytics platforms and how we simplify that complexity. And I think the first thing that we do is centralizing all of that data, right? You're getting, not only are you advertising on all of those channels, but you're getting data from all of those channels, and you're looking at channel reported benchmarks and metrics, and it's just, there's a lot going on. And I think one of the biggest pain points that marketers have is dealing with all of that fragmented data across all of those platforms. And technology solutions, they help because they centralize the marketing data, and plug for Rockerbox, right? This is something that we do. We help brands consolidate all of their spend, their customer journey insights and performance metrics into a single source of truth. And I think that's one of the biggest value propositions of technology and measurement is getting everything in one place and cleaning it so that you have a centralized, clean taxonomy view of all of your data. And then automating cross-channel attribution, like manual reporting is only going to get you so far. You need advanced analytics to help really like automate a lot of that data aggregation, to apply attribution models, to, I don't know, like provide predictive insights and to optimize your spend. You need that. And then like to operationalize the insights across the team, like technology is only valuable if it ultimately leads to action. I think the best platforms don't just provide insights, they help brands to apply them. And that goes from like budgeting to campaign execution to strategy decisions in real time. Like the role of technology is to kind of give you a roadmap and like clarify the mess of data that you're looking at so that you can make better marketing decisions and business decisions.
Yeah, customer journeys are messy. People are bouncing around everywhere. Platforms, devices, app, not app, and all those formats constantly. I'm a consumer. I do the same thing. I open up a web page, I forget, I walk away, I get something on my phone, I'm like, oh yeah, and then I do this. I see an Instagram ad, and I'm like, I'm gonna buy this now. Oh wait, hold on, I want to use Rakuten. So I go to my desk, and then I'm all over the place. Like I'm a nightmare in that scenario. It's like nobody knows what's actually converted me. How do we make sense of that? If you start with an MMM, you get that high level picture of what is working across those channels. What is that contribution that each channel or tactic has? And also, how do those channels work together? Ashley mentioned a little while ago, there's regression models back there. There's like hundreds of regression models back there. So it can also tell you what channels are overlapping a lot too. So there's like some insights there. When we think about incrementality tests, those are used to confirm those results and understand that causality. And then you can apply MTA selectively, like where those user level insights are available. If you have like a walled garden in there, you might not get that, but it can help ID like what those common conversion paths are. We might find that 50% of conversions contain a social and a search touch point. That's a really powerful thing to know. As you're like planning for your strategies, your media plans, your campaigns, if you know those channels work really well together, let them work really well together and try to structure your campaigns and your media accordingly. I'll do a plug for Rockerbox too. Platforms like Rockerbox can help you bring that data together, right? Saves a ton of time. Ultimately though, tech can only do so much, right? The additional magic, so plug for analytics right now. The additional magic when you get these like insights is having analysts who know how to connect those dots and tell that story. You have a really fancy tool and you get this thing, you're like, this is awesome. So what? Having those analysts around to help you be like, so what? What is the recommendation? What do we do? Invaluable.
100%. I mean, honestly, like with the brands that we work with, like one of the qualifiers that we look for in order to kind of like gauge whether or not a brand is going to be at the level where they are able to leverage all of this data that we're talking about giving them is whether or not they have an analyst either on their team or working with a partner who has a team of analysts who are going to be able to like make sense of all of this data. Like if you can't, data is only valuable if it's actionable. So and like that's not like a slight to a lot of teams, but like you really do have to have someone who like understands the nuances of all of these outputs to be able to paint the right picture.
Mm-hmm. We did have another question in the chat. Given the overlap between channels and the role of incrementality testing, how do you determine when to shift budget between channels versus optimizing within a channel?
I can take a stab at this, and then Ashley, I'll probably punt to you. I think if you're using an MMM to say like, hey, I have $1,000, where should I spend it? It will tell you where the best incremental opportunity is. So if you have that next dollar, where's the most profitable place to spend it? It will tell you what channels have hit the ceiling, right? You don't want to be doing diminishing returns. You don't want to be continuing to dump money into a channel where that return isn't as strong. Optimizing within a channel, I'm assuming maybe that's like within the platform. I would partner with my media teams on that. They are the experts there. If they feel that they have optimized the campaign in Google Ads to the best they can with the right audience, the right creative, the right messaging, the right everything, then that to me then says, okay, like maybe we need to shift that budget, or we just test. We don't have to do this like big, gesture. It can be like a small incremental change with the same amount of total money, just maybe we just move a little bit and see if that works. So we don't have to go like whole hog on a decision. I do think that a lot of people forget that you can take baby steps.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is like, this kind of speaks back to leveraging multiple methodologies and like what each of those methodologies, like what insights they're going to be best at driving, especially when you're trying to determine like when you should shift budget, like looking at like taking your, like if we say that multi-touch attribution is kind of like the foundation, like attribution or deduplicated attribution is kind of the foundation layer, and then we want to validate that with our MMM or our incrementality tests. Like we're going to get different insights from those tests and then be able to go back and say like, okay, actually like here's what our true CPA is. And here's how we should like optimize against that. And then like looking at, I think benchmark, like industry benchmarks is important here, and like understanding like, okay, can you rely on what you're seeing? And then I do think like the role of incrementality tests, like this is the role of testing, right? Is to like run some of these tests to understand like what is causal and what isn't. And then should you double down into a channel or continue to optimize for higher performance? Like a lot of the time what we see is customers like will have a channel that's performing like kind of middle of the line. They'll run a test against it and then either see that like, okay, the test results actually are saying that this is not actually like it's not actually necessary, and so then we'll recommend like, okay, maybe you shift your budget away from that channel and then into another channel, or maybe it shows like the test shows like, okay, it's still, there is still some incremental impact from this channel, and then you just need to optimize within that channel. So I think it's like, it's not a black and white like here's what you should always do. It's a matter of looking at all of the data points that you have and seeing how they feed into each other and then making the best decision from there, which is another plug for analysts, right?
Yeah.
Like
The one other thing I would add to this answer is, what is the audience? Right? If you have an audience that's, you know, you're targeting with YouTube and Google Ads and it's the same thing, like maybe that's intentional, but that's like very dependent on the business. So like Ashley said, there isn't like a black and white rule. You have to think about your audiences, what you're doing, what you're actually selling. Like, are you a lead gen company? Are you an e-com company? They're very different approaches. So I think it also sort of depends, that decision depends on what your audiences are within those channels and tactics where you're seeing that overlap. Because an overlap doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It might be a good thing, right? But it also might say, oh, there's some oversaturation here because they're doing the same thing. So you really kind of have to use some context here of like what the audiences are.
Yeah.
We did have another question in the chat. This person said that they missed the first half of the webinar, which we will be sending out a recording afterward. So no worries there. But they were curious about how Rockerbox handles and manages data discrepancies that come across browser, multi-session, and cross-device conversions.
Yeah, in terms of attributing credit percentage to channels. So I think a lot of this comes back to, and Jameson, if I'm missing the point of your question, just let me know. But a lot of this comes back to like, how do we handle identity resolution for the most part? Like, I would assume that that's what you mean by like data discrepancies is like duplication, right? Like when multiple platforms are taking credit for the same conversion. And so the way that we do that and the way that we handle like deduplicated attribution is via identity resolution. And so there's like a couple of core, I don't have time to go all the way into how we approach identity resolution, but just from like a high level, the core like principles of identity resolution at Rockerbox include like site level data capture. So basically Rockerbox's pixel is going to capture a cookie ID, which can be browser specific, and then additional user inputs like email addresses or account IDs during events like logins, email signups, quizzes, surveys, whatever. And then we're also collecting conversion events that capture like billing, shipping addresses, and ensuring a robust user identifier pool. And then what we're also doing is capturing the same persistent identifier like email that's been captured on other like pre-conversion events, even on other devices or across sessions. And then the second thing that we're doing is we're doing batch file integration. So that same persistent identifier in batch files from customers are matched to the digital IDs and then tracked through different site events, which helps to like, I guess it like requires consistency between the data sources. And so it helps kind of like mitigate some of that discrepancy that you're talking about. We also collect like partner specific identifiers. So that would be like integrations with partners like Reddit, like yourself, or Pinterest, which enable like matching via session specific identifiers. And then this ensures attribution even in cases where the login data is unavailable. And then we also have that post-conversion matchback. So like all of these things, I guess all of this to say, like we're treating identity resolution in like the most deterministic way possible and connecting lots of different dots in lots of different ways via all of the data access that we have. And then we have like a whole, like we're matching multiple identifiers to a single user, which is how we get back to that like deduplicated attribution. So I'm happy to like send over, I can send over kind of like our approach to identity resolution if you want to go deeper into it, but that's at a high level.
All right.
I think we might have missed one question, Ariel.
Oh, did we?
Jameson, I will send that over to you. Yes, it looks like
see.
maybe the second question that was there.
I'd like to ask how.
I think it's the one about the MMM assets. I can take that one.
Yeah.
Short answer is no. MMM wouldn't directly identify the best creative assets, messaging, or the format. MMM primarily focuses on like channels, budget allocations, and overall media efficiency rather than granular performance. So, for MMM is not going to directly tell you which specific ad creative worked the best, which messaging or call to action was the best, which audience segments are the best, right? So that's like, for that, I would recommend more like A/B testing and experiments, maybe some platform specific reporting. You can do incrementality testing here to find out like what the impact of different creative themes, but I would not rely on MMM to do that.
Okay, our next question is, how can brands translate insights from this combination of methodologies into actionable strategies? Courtney, did you want to take this one?
Sure. Well, insights that just sit in a dashboard don't do much. I think the trick is to really build that culture in your brand and with your clients and your stakeholders about testing and learning. An example, we ran an MMM for a brand that showed one channel was way more efficient than expected. They were surprised. There was doubt. But we immediately set up a test to confirm that incremental opportunity, that efficiency really was there. And once we did that, we shifted budget mid-quarter. And the result ended up being like we basically improved ROI and returns without even spending an extra dollar. So we didn't spend more money, we just spent it better in that channel mix. I think the best way to take KPIs to action is, what is that process? Do you have regular performance reviews? Are you documenting test results? Like we touched on this earlier. New Engen documents our test plan and approach, and we share that with our clients and stakeholders. But not only that, we create that library of historical test results so that we make sure that all of those insights and learnings are available, and then we can refer back to them and apply what we've learned. So if you keep testing Snapchat, like record the result, right? And if you feel like you have enough of a pattern to say, like, we know the incrementality is this, move on, right? But document it and write it down. Like, don't waste time doing the same thing and expecting different results every time. Other things like having an analytics project roadmap can help unlock this culture of testing and learning. Alignment meetings so that media, creative, and analytics team can act on like what we learned quickly. So I think it's really just like trying to get out of dashboards. Dashboards are critical. Like, I need dashboards to do what I do. I like that. I need that. I need centralized data, right? And sometimes we build the dashboards, sometimes they're provided, like it depends. But I do think the trick to getting out of just like reading out a blended ROAS every week is to think about what is the strategy and what are we trying to do? And just making sure that that always supports that culture of testing and learning. And that's sometimes hard for brands. Like, I've worked with brands and I've worked for brands where testing wasn't part of their DNA. And it's a new spot, and you can start small. You don't have to just buy a fancy incrementality testing tool and just go for it. You can do small A/B tests. You can try just spending a little bit more and looking for short-term signals in platform. Like, there are multiple ways to do this depending on like the maturity of your brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think like just kind of going back to something that I think has been a common theme in this entire presentation, which is that like insights without action it's just a wasted opportunity. Right. And it's like, there's no point in having all of this data and going through all of this effort to glean all of these insights and run all of these different methodologies if you're not actually, like if you don't have the ability to, or if you're not going to take action off of them. So I think a lot of brands like invest in analytics, but then they struggle to translate those insights like we were talking about earlier. And I think the key is really having this framework that turns it into action, whether it's optimizing campaigns or shifting budgets or like validating new initiatives. And each of these methodologies that looks a little bit different, right? That means like using MTA for real-time optimizations. You're not just running a multi-touch attribution model for like kicks and giggles. Like you are running it because you want to make day-to-day optimizations to your campaigns. You want to identify which touch points are contributing to the most conversions. And a brand might see that like, maybe a particular creative on like say Meta is driving higher engagement, but lower conversions. So they want to test new messaging, or they want to shift budgets, or they want to move to a higher performing ad sets. Like those are things like insights that MTA can give you. Whereas like I think MMM is going to be a little bit more targeted towards like those strategic decisions and like strategic budget allocations. Because it's better suited for that, right? And then like we were talking about with incrementality testing, like we're going back to validating your assumptions with testing and making sure that that you're using testing as kind of your truth check for the rest of your measurement. That a brand might suspect that its branded search campaigns are like capturing conversions that would have happened anyways, and so they want to run a holdout test and they want to confirm that maybe they'll find like 30% of their conversions were actually incremental, which allows them to confidently adjust their bidding strategies and like reallocate their budget to other growth channels. So I think like there is this kind of like layered approach to leveraging these methodologies to like actually do something for your business and make forward progress.
Mm-hmm. All right, and our last question is, what emerging trends or technologies should marketers be aware of as they build strategies for the future? Ashley, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can. So this is kind of a loaded question. I think that it would be silly for Courtney or I to like answer like definitively and be like, here's everything that's going to happen in the next even 12 months, because it's the wild, wild west out there right now, from a marketing perspective, from a channel mix perspective, from a measurement perspective. But I do think like one of the things that Rockerbox has really leaned into recently, like over the last year or so, or really like over the last 3 years as we've been like developing all of these different methodologies and offering them to the brands that we work with, is this concept of unified measurement. And I think that as we continue into the future, like the most successful brands are going to be the ones who are thinking about marketing measurement in a more holistic way. I think we spent a lot of time in the industry saying like, this methodology is dead, don't use it, it's the worst, or like this, and like kind of going back, Courtney, to your like last click isn't necessarily like evil. It's not, it shouldn't go away completely. Like we need it for something. And I think it's the brands that recognize that each of these methodologies, each of these approaches, each of these like attribution models, MMMs, testing, like all of these things play a different role. And it's going to be the companies that find a path towards unifying all of those results into a system that works for their business that are going to be more like most successful. I think we're far past the days of being able to operate in a silo when it comes to methodologies. Like we're not, if you're only leveraging one methodology and you're a brand at scale, like, and this is different, right? Like this is advice for upper mid-market enterprise brands. If you're a small brand and you're only spending, $1, $2, $3 million on advertising across just digital channels, like you might not need all of this. Like you don't necessarily, like you don't need it all. You might even be able to get away with just like channel performance, like channel reported metrics. But if you're a brand at scale who's operating across, 12, 15, 20 different channels, and you're spending $100 million on advertising, like you need to find a way to understand like each of these, like the outputs from each of these methodologies, and like allow them to inform the things that they are best at informing, and allowing them to inform each other so that your models are as strong as possible. And I think that's what's emerging, and that's where we're going to see the industry continue to move.
Yeah, that's a really good point Ashley made about if your marketing budgets aren't massive, like you don't need to go run off and do an MMM. Like that might not be appropriate for you. If you're only doing like paid search and maybe SMS or email, that might be okay for now until you have like enough of a channel mix. Then you can get more complicated in advance, but there's probably not a lot of sense in like starting super advanced. I think it's definitely a buildup. I've got a couple takes. I totally agree. Unified measurement. It's happening. Get on board. It's happening. Couple others I think of are like privacy first stuff. Like we're losing that deterministic stuff, like the login, first party data. Like it's getting harder. So that's something like people are going to have to start thinking about. Like what are the other things that we can use in its place? I feel compelled to mention AI here. I feel like that buzzword's everywhere. So I think, and my take is this. Tools are getting better at automating insights and building the models. However, the human oversight of that is still essential. That's not going away. We will not be able to account for AI to think for us. We can rely on AI to do some of the legwork, but I do think that AI is not going to replace the human judgment calls. So that correct interpretation of the results is still going to be there. But I do think we'll start to see like more AI assisted things like, chat bots and maybe some dashboard tools to say like, you can ask what was my ROAS year over year, probably going to be correct. But if you're going to ask it to model out something with this, this, and this, it's probably not going to give you the best answer. So that's my take on AI. And then I think the other thing is cross-channel measurement. There's that holistic measurement of using all those different tools, but we start to see like a lot of rise in retail media, like Amazon, Walmart, Target, and then CTV, Hulu's, et cetera, smart TVs. We need measurement that's going to go beyond those standard metrics and account for all those brand building offline impacts. So I think ultimately like your KPIs need to focus on incremental growth and long-term things rather than just short-term last click. So like you can do lift and hold out tests in the short term, watch for those spikes in brand search volume, look for high conversion rate for exposed users. But long-term is like that higher retention, repeat purchases. So I think just again, cross-channel measurement and that unified framework, you have to have that really strong foundation because it's not going to be as simple anymore as that last click GA tells us everything. That's just not really the way things are going. So it's getting more complicated, but I do think it's also getting more interesting. So that is my crystal ball take on the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the AI call out was a good one.
I see that term everywhere. I just felt like someone had to talk about it.
I know. And it's true. And I think like, I think it's like artificial intelligence is being built into so many of these things that it's like, yeah, obviously AI, but I think I liked your take on it. And I agree that like AI is actually going to be helping to like pull the insights, not necessarily like building the models. I think we're pretty far from AI being able to like handle this type of data load and like actually accurately.
Yeah, I am not afraid of AI. I'm a proponent. I use it a lot.
Yeah.
And I think those people that adopt it are really going to thrive. I don't believe it's going to take my job. I think it's going to help me be better at my job.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we had one more question, Ariel.
Yes. Can you give some examples of incrementality testing and how it fits in with MMM and MTA?
Either of us can. Courtney, do you want to give some?
Yeah, I'll do like the first take. So we mentioned this a little bit early on in a couple different places. I see incrementality testing kind of being, I see MMM leading, right? So we do an MMM, we understand what channels are really driving the most impact, where is the incremental opportunity, where should we adjust budgets of things that maybe have hit the ceiling, like can we take 20K from Google, non-brand and put it into, let's say, TikTok, I don't know. We might see that there's a readout from the MMM that says, hey, did you know that there's like a $19 incremental ROAS in TikTok? Meaning if I gave you an extra dollar, you're going to get $19 back. That's like a shocking result. So that to me signals, let's go test that. Like your MMM results, I feel should dictate your incremental testing plan, right? Those things that are like, make you go, that's interesting. Yes, that is interesting. Let's go test it to prove. And if those results then align, great. The next time you refresh your MMM, apply that knowledge either literally when you build the model or just like in your mind when you read the results next time. Ashley, do you want to comment on the MTA part and how it could
Yeah. And then on the MTA side, I mean, one of the things that we're actually starting to work with our customers right now is like gathering test results from our customers and then figuring out how can we best calibrate their MTA with those results. And so like we have a group of customers in beta with that right now, trying to figure out like, okay, what is the best way for us to take these results? Just like Courtney was saying with MMM, but kind of going the other way, right? Like Courtney, you're talking about like MMM to testing. We're talking about then taking that testing result, integrating it back into your MTA so that your MTA is more accurate. And like, that's like that whole concept of calibration and like leveraging multipliers to like understand like, where's the point of diminishing returns? Like, what is the actual causal impact of all of these channels? And like, how do we best build a model from a multi-touch perspective that's going to be informative and accurate for our customers? So it's really interesting. I mean, I think the reason that you run tests like is really clear. I think we talked about that a lot today. But then like leveraging those back into your different the different models that you're using, or even going back like through, I assume like Courtney, if you were building an MMM for someone and then like it led you to run a test, like you're going to take those test results and feed them back into that MMM, right? And so that's going to be more accurate. So it's really like creating this like really circular view, which like goes all the way back to unified measurement, which is what we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. And if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat now.
Ooh, and here I told Courtney, no, it probably won't go a whole hour.
We did.
6 minutes.
It was a great conversation.
Awesome. It was fun.
All right, well, that wraps up today's discussion. A huge thank you to Ashley and Courtney for sharing their insights, and of course to all of you for joining us. We also invite you to explore unified marketing measurement with Rockerbox by booking a demo with us. And as a reminder, the session has been recorded and we'll be sending it out shortly after this. So if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. And thank you.
Yeah, and also before we end, one huge shout out to New Engen. We appreciate New Engen and Courtney for joining us today. And I'm sure they're going to follow up with you all as well and send you more information on what they offer. So be on the lookout.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.